Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. I am one of your hosts. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be here with you, listeners. I hope that you've had a good week. As good as one can have in the midst of a global pandemic, with a presidential election bearing down, and just 2020 does not play around. Like every week, it is something huge and unexpected and on par. As a very small token of that, today I was trying to text Scott, I think, who is here. Hello, Scott Melson. How are you?
What's up, dude?
And my phone auto-corrected week to wreck. And I was like, something about this wreck. And I was like, that's very on brand for this week. So we're joined by Scott Melson and also, as always, Bailey Perkins. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
All right. So this week, I sound upbeat, and it's not an upbeat thing, but Oklahoma has crossed 600 known deaths due to COVID-19. We are at perhaps a slight downtrend in cases, but we're still up. You know, we've had more than 42,000 cases cumulatively, which is crazy. I should have gone back and added up how many cases since last week, because I think...
I mean, it's going to be something in the neighborhood of like 5,000.
Yeah, I was going to say 6,000 or so since last week.
6,000, something like that.
Yeah, so, that has really been a big focus this week, and I guess we can start there like we do all the time. I mean, that's what we're all doing. I had a meeting this week, an in-person meeting, which was novel.
Those are a thing still?
We sat outside on a patio with masks on, an appropriate 6 feet or so away. And,
Andy, you only have to wear a mask when physical distancing isn't possible. Did you know that?
Yes, but between having a newborn and a
listeners, don't listen to that. Wear a mask all the friggin' time, please. Listen,
that's right.
Please wear a mask all the time.
We have I have a 6-month-old today is Margot's 6-month birthday, and also a family member who has just completed radiation, and so I'm not taking any chances if I can avoid it. But it was good to see, and I saw some friends. I waved at them from across the patio, across the parking lot. It was nice to see people in person. It was 95 degrees, and it was very uncomfortable in multiple ways, but this is the world we live in today.
But was it also, I mean, like, and I'm not being facetious when I ask this, like, I mean, I get, like, being outside in 95 degrees with a mask on, like, it's uncomfortable and it stinks, but was it also, like it's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's fine.
Totally fine.
If everyone would just do that, like, I mean, I think you're right. Like, we are looking, depending on exactly how you look at the data, so you can look at, the 7-day average of new cases. I think I'll have to go back and look and see who tweets this out every day. But there's another way where you look at cases trending, but the cases are charted from the date of symptom onset, which is a different way of looking at the data than from the date of positive test.
Right.
When you look at it from the date of symptom onset, it looks like we may actually be kind of sloping down, like we may have actually hit a peak and starting to trend down. Which roughly coincides with the starting of mandatory masking here in Oklahoma City and several communities around the metro. And like, that's like wearing masks, not going to large parties, trying to do as much as you can outside, and keeping your like kind of group of people that you're around pretty small. Like, that's really all it takes. Like, this isn't rocket science. It's everyone would just do it. And like,
it would save lives.
And it saved, right? Like,
life-saving
like
behaviors.
It saves lives. So if you could have a 30-minute meeting or however long your meeting was, Andy, if you can wear a mask and do it outside, fine. Have your in-person meeting and enjoy getting to see somebody, not over a computer screen. That sounds wonderful.
Well, it's also important to know on the topic of COVID that next week, Oklahoma will be getting a visit from a White House official. So White House coronavirus, if I can get my words out, response coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx, will be visiting to provide guidance to our state related to COVID-19. So we'll see how that turns out.
Do y'all ever do that thing where like your friend is coming to visit and you're like, oh yeah, like I invited them to come, but then they're like, oh wait, no, I didn't invite them to come, and then they were like, oh, I don't know why they're coming. They're just showing up, because that's what happened with Dr. Birx this week. It was hilarious. If you watched,
that doesn't happen to me, but go ahead.
If you watch the governor's press conference, they're like, Governor Stitt, what prompted Dr. Birx's visit? Oh well, I'm on calls with this group, every week with the vice president and Dr. Birx and the coronavirus task force, and since she's going to be in the area, we'd asked her to come see, how we're doing here in Oklahoma. So Governor Stitt, you invited her? No, I think they had wanted her to come because she's going to be in the area anyway, and by area he means Nebraska, right? And they're like, so Governor Stitt, they told you that the reason she's coming is just because she's going to be there. Well, I mean, no, we haven't been briefed on why she was supposed to come. It was like literally like a different answer to the same question like 3 times in the space of like 90 seconds.
Well, I mean, if you're the politician in that situation or whoever, right? Like, you are immediately confronted with the fact that you don't have a good answer to this question, and you've got to come up with one on the spot, and that doesn't always work out well. We've all been there, whether it's in a political realm or on a first date or you're talking to your mom, whatever it is. Like, at some point, you're like, I'm just going to bumble this for a few minutes.
Well, you have an answer, but you can't say the answer because to say the answer would contradict the misinformation that you've been spewing for the last month.
Well, I mean,
but sometimes the right answer is just, we're looking to get more information, and we'll let you know once we find out more information.
And that's the funny thing. And I get that this is hard, having been in this position myself on a number of occasions. I mean, not identical, but similar. That when someone asks you a question and, a tiny part of your brain is like, what I should say is just like, I should take a breath and be like, yeah, we're happy to have the White House's help, and leave it at that. And that would have been probably a better response. But, Bailey, you probably would have been in this role too. And Scott, maybe you get put on the spot with patients. Your brain starts racing ahead and you just start saying words. And then in the hindsight, you're like, dang it, I should not have said 80% of those words. What I should have just said is, yeah, she's coming. And, we haven't worked out all the details yet, but we're excited she's going to be here, and we'd love to show off how Oklahoma is open for business, or, whatever it's easy for us here, I guess, to say. It's easy for us to, like, armchair quarterback the situation when there's no pressure, no cameras on us, we're way after the fact.
Well, and we don't add that space for politicians to acknowledge that they don't have information, or give them space to say, we're learning more and we'll let you know once we find out what develops, or to say, I don't know, just flat out, right? Because we expect them to know all the things about all of the issues and to be experts overnight. And so, Andy, I think you raised a great point, because that's something I've learned in my profession, is the best way to build trust is to have the right answers, and then to say, I don't know, but I'll find out if I don't know. And so I hope that we can expand that space for our politicians and elected leaders to be able to say, I don't know, but I want to know more, or I want to find out more information, or I'll get back to you.
And hold them to it, right? Like, that's an easy way to dismiss someone, and the proof is in the pudding if you follow through on that deal.
So you're both 100% right. However,
I was like, thank you. Well, this has been a good episode. We'll see you guys later.
But I want to push back a little bit, because I don't think that this is an instance where the governor doesn't know why. I mean, maybe Governor Stitt has no idea why the White House has dispatched Dr. Birx to come to Oklahoma, but I mean, I think the White House has been very clear that they're dispatching her because we're seeing a spike in cases and they're making some recommendations that we're not following. And she's coming to provide some Oklahoma specific guidance on things that we can and should do to try and bring our spiking cases under control. Like the White House has said that, right? However, but for Governor Stitt to say that would require Governor Stitt to acknowledge that we're having a spike in cases. It's not a plateau. It's not steady. We're not at the same place we were in June 1st when we opened up. Like the line has been for like the last 6 weeks, like, no, we're great. We've got tons of runway. Like everything's no spike here. We're at a plateau between 700 and 1,400 cases. Like we're at a plateau between this number and twice this number. And so, you see what I'm saying? Like you're both 100% right that like one, we don't get politicians the space, and two, it's really really hard to try and come up with answers on the spot. And like we need to have like, I mean, just in general, like we need to give people the space to say like, I don't know, whether that's like your doctor or your spouse or your friend or the governor or whoever. Like, yes, I'm just, I don't know, maybe overly cynical and question whether this is an instance where the governor like truly doesn't know.
Well, Scott, to your point, there's an interesting synergy with what the majority whip mentioned, Representative Clyburn, about their concerns that Oklahoma isn't following the protocols and guidance sent to them in the request that committee recommended. But also the White House is saying we're coming down to provide you some guidance because Oklahoma needs some support in getting a hand on these cases. And so, I mean, that is a great point that there has been time to think through of this elevated attention Oklahoma has received from both sides of the aisle and from two different branches of the government.
Yeah, it is. I will say it is difficult in many cases if you are the leader, right? Especially if you are, I've never been the governor, right? But like I can imagine if you are the leader of the entire state, like you in some ways are at the top of the pyramid here, right? Arguably, at least in visibility, and you are confronted with the reality that like someone higher than you on, a bigger pyramid is telling you you're not doing a good enough job and you need to fix it. And people are asking you questions and you don't have all the answers right then. And that's like a very tenuous situation where the mental calculations that are going through your head in that moment, are difficult, right? Like people say weird things, just like, a lot of, the left, was given President Trump flack yesterday, about saying Thailand instead of Thailand. I was like, okay, like it's easy to make fun of someone, but I get it that if you look at a word that is spelled Thai, the normal English pronunciation would be Thai, right? He's not. I think that was a normal slip. We've all said things. I called someone by the total wrong name yesterday. Her name was Amanda, and I called her Rebecca. I don't know why. Like, and it was
in the
just,
grand scheme of all the things that are important right now, like
let's not
really on the list.
Let's not skewer someone for a minor faux pas. Now, I mean, and arguably, like Joe Biden has gaffes all the time, like, and he's kind of known for that.
Uncle Joe's never misspoken in his life.
Not in the last 15 minutes. But like it is, and some of his are downright painful. Like it's just.
I just wonder, like, for his national campaign team, like how do we?
I saw a meme yesterday
with not just spewing what comes out. I mean, but the same thing with President Trump is like, candidates need to. Those campaign teams need to rally in the message.
I mean, full disclosure. I think we talked about this on the pod before. I really like Joe Biden. I voted for Elizabeth Warren. She was my choice, but I like Joe Biden. But I did see a great meme. You guys have seen Ocean's 11, the movie Ocean's 11, George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon. So do y'all remember the scene when George Clooney, he confronts Julia Roberts' character in the restaurant? And he's asking her, like, why are you with Terry Benedict, the main, like, antagonist? And she says, I'm with Terry now. And he looks her in the eye and he goes, does he make you laugh? And she looks back and she goes, he doesn't make me cry. I saw a meme going around yesterday. This is me voting for Joe Biden. Does he make you laugh? He doesn't make me cry.
That's funny.
And
it's so tough. I have a number of friends that are either Republicans or they were Republicans and now they're independents, and they have been very vocal of just like, you know what, I can't vote for Trump, but I also don't want to vote for Biden, and so like this discussion of like, do I not vote in this? And I think that is a very significant decision that will have implications on the election, right? Because if enough people do that, well, then like it just affects turnout. That means that it means that if you do vote in the presidential race, your vote counts more than it would otherwise, right? Like you have an outsized impact. So everyone, you should, if you're listening, please vote in every race on your ballot. Your voice matters. It's very important.
And it's another testament on like the flaws of a two-party system, is that it makes people feel like they don't have options that represent them. And so you either hold your nose and vote or you don't turn out at all. And so, I mean, that's just another one of those age-old civic discussions on what would it take to make people feel good about voting and make them feel like have the opportunity to pick a candidate that aligns with the things they believe in.
Can we dig into that a little bit more? Because I was actually thinking about this because Andy, I've heard some people say the same thing, like I can't vote for Trump, but I really don't want to vote for Biden. And I've read some kind of punditry type articles, like some, there's one school of thought that says, I think first, I guess laying out, can we all agree that the next president of the United States, like barring something that we can't anticipate, either, this time next year, the president of the United States is either going to be Joe Biden or Donald Trump, barring like a God forbid, like a death or something, like it's going to be Joe Biden or Donald Trump who is the next president of the United States, right? Like it's not going to be the Libertarian candidate. It's not going to be the Green Party candidate. And I have seen when Justin Amash was running, I saw some mostly Republican commentators that were writing like, people tell me that like if I don't vote for Biden, that's a vote for Trump. Like that's BS. I'm going to vote for Justin Amash because that's the closest to where I like align. And I'm curious what you guys think about that, because on the one hand, like I want people to vote where they feel like I want people to vote for what they believe in, but at the same time, like at what point, what does it take for to have more than two options, right? Like what does it take? Like is it true to say if a vote to not vote for Biden is to vote for Trump, or to not vote for Trump is to vote for, like, is that dichotomy true, or is there some utility to voting for a third party candidate? And I mean this like not just specific to this election and whatever the stakes are of this election. I mean like in more of a macro sense, if that makes sense.
I will say, I just as a first thing, I think voters should vote for the candidate that they want to win, right? Absolutely. Like, regardless of who that is, I think you should vote. And I know that it's hard sometimes, and we all struggle with that, whether it's the president or it's your state representative or it's the sheriff or whatever. Your passion is important. Your vote matters. And so I also think that this issue, right, and the same person that I had a conversation with the other day about their lackluster support for either candidate said, like, this is what we get with just these two parties. And they were expressing their disdain for our current two-party system. And I will tell listeners, and I'll link to this in the show notes, but there's a book about this that's pretty interesting. It's called Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, The Case for Multi-Party Democracy in America by Lee Drutman. And I may have mentioned this before. I went to a book signing thing with the author, where he gave an overview of this, and then it was moderated by David Brooks from the New York Times. It was very interesting, and the book is I think interesting and compelling in some ways. And the people that are most opposed to the idea of a multi-party system are my friends who are the most partisan one way or the other, right? Like I had a conversation with two people yesterday who are, I will say, highly partisan Democrats in that they have either run for elected office or they have been involved in races, and they, I think, cannot help but see the world through this very us versus them, right versus left, Republican versus Democrat duopoly in that worldview. And in doing so, I think it's harder for them. It's harder for people who are highly partisan to be open to or to comprehend the idea of some kind of coalition-based government, similar to what we see in a number of other democracies around the world. But the United States has been this way, and it's ironic we're having this conversation because just yesterday I saw a meme with the quote from, I think, George Washington, but you can correct me, one of the founding fathers, about their concern about the two-party system, right? And like they were worried that America would fall into this, and it would result in this kind of harsh, a difficult split that we have today.
Well, and we make assumptions too that we don't have elements of multi ideals, because within the two-party system, there's factions within these political parties. So you're seeing differences among conservatives who focus fiscally versus the Tea Party fundamentalists versus in the Democratic Party, you have your progressives versus what they describe as far left. And so what would that multi-party system look like, and how would it function in a way that gets you to a majority vote? I think what I would tell people is vote your conscience, because everyone, that's the beauty about living in this country, right? Is that everyone can make a decision for why they want to do the thing that they want to do and the way they want to do it when it comes to who they want to vote for. So if you do have the mindset that I want to have a strategic vote, then vote the way that you decide. If you say this particular candidate, while I may not have, a shot at winning, there's just no possible way, but this person, really aligns with my values, and vote your values if that's what's most important to you. And so it's an age-old a politics conversation and political science question of what political system within a democracy allows people to feel connected and allows them to have true autonomy in decision making and finding candidates that align with their worldview.
Yeah, the other thing that's related to this, I think you made some really good points, Bailey. The other thing that's related to this, though, is that there are systems, right? Aside from just like finding good third-party candidates, there are systems or changes we can make to our electoral process that would make it easier for more candidates, not just third party, but third, fourth, fifth party candidates to compete, right? So you can rank choice vote. That's exactly right. And I will
open primaries would do this too.
Yes. Yes. So a couple of plugs related to that. One, our neighbors to the east, Arkansas, have two initiatives this year that they will be voting on in November that I'm watching closely because I'm interested in this kind of stuff. One that is independent redistricting. So of course I'm talking to, I'm interested in that. But secondly, the other one is a kind of a joint or a hybrid initiative about ranked choice voting and open primaries. It's like a top 4 system. And I haven't read the full policy yet, but it sounds very compelling, and I'll be interested to see if it passes and what that looks like. Also, Massachusetts, I believe, will be voting on ranked choice voting. Maine already has it, and I think this will be the first year that it is used in a presidential election. And so,
and Andy, before we go forward, can we define ranked choice voting for those who are not familiar?
Yeah, and so ranked choice voting is a system that you can vote, and you vote your preference, like you rank the candidates. So you can vote for one. You don't have to change anything. You could just vote for the one person you want the most. Or if you have people that you're like, I like them the most, I like them the next most, and them the third most, you can do that. For example, if Oklahoma had this, and I guess this may be the case in Maine, you have the two major party candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and then you have these other third party candidates, right? Like, so you've got Kanye West, who apparently is running a campaign just to mess with Biden, according to the news this week. But let's say you liked Trump the most, or let's say you like Kanye the most, Trump the second most, and then you don't like Biden at all, right? Well, if you have a ranked choice, you'd rank Kanye 1, Trump 2, and then you just go from there. And if a candidate gets more than 50%, then they win. That makes sense. Like, the majority of people wanted them initially. But if no one gets more than 50%, rather than having a runoff or that kind of thing, the lowest person, they get bumped out, and all of those votes go to whoever those voters chose second, right? And so this would be, it's also called instant runoff voting. And so in a race like the Oklahoma 5th District congressional primary for Republicans, where they had 12 candidates, I think, right?
Well, I think it was 8.
8 candidates? Yeah. Either way, 8, 12.
It's a lot.
It's a great example where, like, right now they're down to a runoff between Stephanie Bice and Terry Neese, but we could have avoided a runoff and saved money by having a ranked choice system where you'd rank your favorite candidates in order of preference, and at the end, we would have a winner from the first election. So it is a cost-saving measure. I think it's really interesting.
And it also affirms those whose first and second choice may not have been those top 2 candidates.
Right.
So that way, so if your candidate didn't advance, you still have the opportunity to weigh in, okay, who would be your preference to then have a say in the outcome. Yeah, the Democratic primary for president is another great example, right? Yeah. Scott mentioned that he voted for Warren. I don't know who his second choice would have been, but if he had ranked them, like, you have a chance of, like, even if your first person doesn't win, maybe your second choice does, right? And so in the end, you end up with more competitive races, and you end up with better candidates. So and I say better, I mean less extreme candidates in either direction, right? Because people are like, maybe I like Warren the most, and I'm going to vote for her, but she's arguably one of the more liberal members of the party, right? Maybe they like Bernie second. But then the third choice is like, well, maybe I liked, Pete Buttigieg. And so they vote him third. And so if Warren doesn't get 50%, or no one gets 50%, and if they get redistributed, then there's a chance that maybe your second favorite or your third favorite wins. And it's like you don't waste your vote. You don't waste your vote. That's exactly right.
Wasted voting. I love ranked choice voting. I love open primaries, which open primaries basically just means, like, rather than a partisan primary, it is like one primary, and then the 2 top vote getters go on to the general election. So you can have a primary that results in a Republican versus a Democrat, a primary that results in 2 Republicans, or a primary that results in 2 Democrats. Is another way you can do this. I would also say one thing that would potentially benefit, or not, I think it really would benefit, like, third parties or fourth and fifth parties, is the elimination of straight ticket voting, right? Where you can't just vote for one party. But one thing that is a huge impediment to all of this, and I don't know, and I honestly don't know, you could make a case, I think, where, let's say that you had a Republican candidate, a Democrat candidate, and some third party, a libertarian candidate that caught the nation's imagination, right? And so now you have 3 viable candidates in the general election, right? Well, now it has become dramatically harder for one candidate to get 270 electoral votes, which is what really determines who wins the presidency, right? We don't have a majority win system. We have an electoral college system.
Right.
And so what happened?
And within that electoral college system, it's a majority rule. So I think that's another challenge, that if the electoral college actually reflected the votes within that state. So let's say in an Oklahoma, Donald Trump gets
60% and somebody else gets 40%, yeah.
And then Joe Biden gets 40%. Then if we have 10 electoral college votes in theory, 6 of them go to Donald Trump, 4 go to Biden. Right. I think that would make at least people feel that
like a proportional allocation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But since we don't have that, what I think what happens, and if a lawyer wants to tell me I'm wrong on Twitter, please, so I can learn. But my understanding is if no one gets a majority in the electoral college, then the presidency is decided by the House of Representatives. And so you could actually make these reforms in an attempt to give more people the opportunity to vote for a viable candidate of their choice without being limited to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And the outcome could be a less democratic mechanism because the president would be elected by the House, not by the people, which is freaking crazy. I mean, it's just kind of, it's a little bonkers, I think. But
well, and you and I, Scott, often plug the 538 Politics podcast, and this week or last week's episode, they had one, and they talked about that where I guess the House picks the president and the Senate picks the VP if there's not a winner, and so like Nate Silver said, arguably if it's a contested election on election day, then really as you get closer to January 20th, it gets more and more clear about what has to happen because there are constitutional provisions for that. Like effectively on December 20 or January 20th, if President Trump loses, his term would be over, and it would.
Well, I would say one thing. So no matter what happens, his term is over at 11:59 on January 20th, 2021. Right. The question is, he will cease to be president. The question is whether he gets to be president again or if it's somebody else.
Right. Well, I mean, that's if he wins the election, free and clear, then that's all these things are moot. But if it becomes contested, that's what I'm saying, then his presidency would end. And if it's contested on who the winner is, there are scenarios where the House picks the winner. Because it would go. I think Nate even said there's a very, very low chance scenario where it would go to the line of succession, which means if he and Pence are both out, it would go to Nancy Pelosi, and there's no way the Republicans are going to allow that to happen. And so I was like, whoa, this is deep in the weeds, but
also kind of awesome.
Well, yeah, this is some episode of The Blacklist where something very obscure happens and they're having to invoke some kind of power in the hallway, and I can't see this happening, but it made for a very interesting podcast episode.
Yeah, and it's just really incredible how these processes established, more than 2 centuries ago, to prepare for these moments. And for the first time, in our history, we're really having to grapple with, what does this look like if we have to go to plan B or plan C in the way that it's been defined by our Constitution? So from a political science aspect, it's fascinating to think through what these scenarios could possibly look like.
Yeah, I remember being in college and watching the news coverage of all the dangling chads and whatnot in 2000 and that election and just what a mess, and being I mean, even then I was not civically engaged. I didn't know anything. But I remember at work, we had the TV on and just watching them hold up the little punch card ballots and thinking, why are we using those ballots? Why does Florida have this archaic system that is, even in the best of circumstances, seems like a very bad system? Punch cards are what we used to control computers in the 70s, and the fact we were still using them for elections was bananas. So hopefully things have come a long way. But I guess we will find out exactly how secure our elections are state to state come November.
Yeah, yeah, and we can move on to something else. This is just something I've been thinking about, like, because I have had those conversations of people like, well, I can't vote for, I'm not going to vote for this one, but I feel like I can't vote for that one, so I'm either not going to vote or I'm going to vote for some third party, or I'm going to write in, I'm going to write in Obama, or I'm going to write in Reagan, or I'm going to write in FDR, or whatever. And I just was curious what you guys thought about the like, and I don't know what the right word is. What you thought about kind of the implications of that?
I mean, it really is thinking about what matters most to the voter, because it is a reality that Supreme Court appointments or who leads different agencies, like who leads the Department of Education or who leads DOD or whatever the entity is really determined by who holds that executive seat. And so there's so much power that comes with sorry, my phone fell. There's so much power that comes with that role. And so that's something voters have to think about and consider is that something that matters to them? Like, what is the issue that will draw them to vote, and what decision will they make? Because if you do vote third party, then that is a reality that like you have to accept, is that if the person who ends up winning that and you definitely don't like that candidate has those positions of power, that has generational impacts over time, especially when it comes to court appointments. So
well, yeah, I mean, I have family members who voted for Trump in 2016 and did so. They were like, well, because they really didn't like Hillary. They didn't like Trump either, but they voted because of the Supreme Court picks and have since regretted the decision because obviously those picks are important, but they are one of, thousands of decisions that the leader of the free world makes. And they were like, man, they approve of his choices, but the whole process has been kind of gross, and the other ramifications have really left a bad taste in their mouth. And so, in the words of Alexander Hamilton, don't throw away your shot.
So we had a listener tweet at us this week and ask if we could discuss a statement that the governor made at his press conference this week. So Governor Stitt was asked if he feels like Oklahoma, if there should be a second stimulus package, another CARES Act. And the governor seemed pretty firm in his conviction that nope, we do not need another stimulus package. We got a $1.2 billion the first time, and we should focus on getting that out the door, and we're good. Don't need any more money. Don't need to be just spending more money. That received quite the response on the Twitters and the other social medias. Thoughts? You guys thoughts?
And this couples with the conversations that have been happening with prominent either Oklahoma leaders or wealthy Oklahomans on the conversation of whether or not we should have more unemployment supplements from the federal government as well. So both of those conversations have been happening at the same time of do state and local governments need more stimulus money, and B, do those who are facing unemployment right now deserve that extra $600?
What do you guys think? Because there's been a lot, and there's been a lot of talk about the extra $600 a week in unemployment insurance, and there are, I think there is pretty compelling economic data that shows that has increased like wages, like take home wages,
to spend it on.
And that has actually kept a lot of people afloat. But then there are also lots of employers that are saying, my people won't come back to work because they're getting more money. They're more money coming in, staying at home, collecting unemployment plus the extra 600 than what they would bring in to come back to work for me. What do you guys think? What are thoughts?
I think it's tough, right? Like anything like this, you're trying to make a policy decision that affects 300 million people. And it's clearly not a one size fits
50
all.
different states.
Right.
With thousands and thousands of local governments.
Right. And the different cost of livings, between states and within states. Right. And so like I have, as an example, like, we received stimulus money like everyone else did. Very appreciative. But we've been fortunate. My wife and I both are still able to work. And so like we didn't need the money in the same way that both like my sister and my brother-in-law or one of my brothers-in-law have, right? And so when I have a family member who is several who work in the service industry, which has been decimated, right? Like you close restaurants and bars and you're going to have this huge impact because of their state unemployment and the federal together. They are receiving more money than they would have normally. But they're not stupid. Like we had this conversation and they're like, we're saving this money because we're going to have to, like, this is not going to last forever. Like they know how the government works and they're trying to plan ahead a little bit. And it's
Andy,
not.
There's an assumption too that folks are out here making six figures
Right.
on unemployment plus the supplement. And when we're talking about many of these industry jobs, many of them are already low paying as is.
Yes.
And so people are probably experiencing feeling comfortable for a change more so than feeling like they can't keep up in the economy.
Right.
And so I don't think it's a fair picture that so many are painting that people are swimming in a cash bathtub.
Right. Right.
If they're a pool. And it's really people are working to get out of debt or not have to borrow if they had to borrow in the past or be able to be on time with their bills. Like,
right.
I mean, I think, that's one thing that I think is a really important point that you're making, Bailey, is that like, there's on the one hand, I think there's two sides to the coin. And I honestly think that there's some validity to both. Like one is that like, okay, if you're making more, like if folks are making more and experiencing like some degree of financial stability on their unemployment plus the extra $600, that doesn't speak to the fact that the unemployment is too generous. It speaks to the fact that they're not paid enough in their job in the first place, right?
Right. Well,
right?
and I was going to say,
the flip side though is like as an employer, right? Like, I mean, I'm not an employer. Like I don't write anybody's paycheck, so I haven't experienced this myself. But like, I think that there are employers who are saying like, I'm not. I think that there are employers who really do try to take good care of their staff and they try to pay them as much as they can. And they're not trying to like take advantage of people. And they're saying, I can't afford to pay my people an extra $600 a week. Like I think that there are industries who 100% can afford to make up that difference and should, but I think that there are others who don't. Do you guys think that's right?
That's right, but this money isn't coming from the employer; it's coming from the federal government, right? And the other thing is,
it's not. But it's not. It's coming from the federal government. But like I think that there are employers who are saying, moving forward, it's going to be hard for me to get people to come back to work for me because they're going to take a financial hit coming back to work, and I'm paying them as much as I can.
I mean, I can see where the argument comes from. However, like, try it, right? Like, if that's the case, like, let's talk about the degree to which the difference is, right? Because a couple of things, like the unemployment money that they receive from their state is less than their full salary anyway.
It's about 40. It's about 40% of their
salary
salary.
Right. So you're getting
about 40%. I mean, just think about that for a second. If 40% plus $600 a week is more than you like bring home, I mean, like they're not like
it's probably tight as it is, right? Yeah, that's so. I mean, so $600 a week is $2,400 a month, so that's $32,000 or something a year, right? Like, so that alone is not a lot of money. I mean, $32,000 used to be like when I started working 20 years ago, when I entered the job market, right? Like that was on the low end of what you'd make as a mental health worker. But that was kind of standard. But that's 20 years ago, and the time value of money tells us that that same wage by necessity should be higher. And so, yeah, if it's that plus half of your other salary. So let's say you're making, I don't know, 50,000 and you're getting 40% of that. So you're getting like 20,000 a year. So 20 plus 32 is 52,000.
You're coming out a little bit ahead, but not much.
Slightly ahead, you're right, but about even. And the idea that unemployment is designed to help people like as a bridge, right? Well, that's in normal circumstances where there are other jobs available. Maybe that makes sense. But in the market right now, those jobs went away and they have not come back, and they may never come back.
100%.
Or not for a very long time. Like this pandemic is going to have fundamentally different shifts than anything that any of us have experienced ever in history, right? Like it is, we've talked about this a bunch, but it is propelling, working from home. It is propelling, distance working, all that kind of stuff. Like it is also forcing people to do more with less. And it is going to have very long range implications for the job market. And that means that some of these jobs aren't coming back. And therefore, we need to probably start talking about retraining, right? Like things that we talked about in 2008, 2009, right? When manufacturing tanked and we started talking about retraining automotive workers for high-tech jobs or for white-collar jobs. And no one is talking about that now because I think we as a country, at least, just keep crossing our fingers and hoping that the pandemic will be over one day, we'll wake up and everything's magically the same and we can continue on with our life. And that is just not what's happening.
Well, this is kind of where I was wanting to go with the question because I want to be clear. Like, I hope I'm not. I'm not trying to make the point that I think the extra $600 a week is like too generous and it should stop. I'm not like I think it was the right thing to do, and I think that to continue it is probably still the right thing to do. I'm just like kind of. One of the things that's happening right now, and the reason that this question came up at the governor's press conference is because, our representatives and senators, mostly our senators, right now are in Washington trying to figure out what they're going to do. And this continuation of unemployment insurance, expanded unemployment insurance, is apparently a major sticking point, right? There's parts of there's part of the Democratic caucus that wants to see it go until like June of next year. There's part of the Republican caucus in the Senate that wants to be like, stop now, it's over. It's expired last Saturday and we're not going to renew it. There are some hybrid models of like, well, maybe we do 400 instead of 600. There's, I want to say, there was a bipartisan couple, I forget who it was, that put forward a bill that was like, it was Mitt Romney and somebody. It was Mitt Romney and somebody that were like, we'll do 600 for another like, another 600 a week for another like however long, a few months or something, but then it will be 400 and then 300 and then like it'll gradually go down. There's talk about tying it to the unemployment rate, which I think has huge problems because that doesn't just reflect how many people are in the workforce. It also has how many people are actively looking for jobs that aren't there. So that's, I think that's one thing that's what I wanted to go with you guys is like, what do you guys think? If you're the benevolent dictator of the world, what is the policy option? What are the policy options here that to you seem to make sense?
Well, Scott, one thing I want to note, like as we go into that, is the fact that it's disingenuous for Oklahomans to make the argument that it's preventing people from that it's slowing the workforce or that it's slowing the economy, because we're a right to work state. So if employers want to say, oh, you don't want to come back to work, they can say, well, you're fired, and then now you can't get unemployment benefits, right? And so it's not easy to qualify for unemployment in Oklahoma. And so it's really unfortunate and frustrating to hear this narrative that people are just trying to take, advantage of the system and just want to kick it at home and blow money when that's not the story of Oklahoma right now. And so if there was a way if you want to talk about differences in cost of living, then design a bill that has a maximum amount that goes to different places that take into account those different cost of livings. And so if you have a threshold for folks who live in Oklahoma versus people who live in San Francisco, that makes sense. But to say that the extra monies aren't necessary and they aren't helping people is just going to cripple our state's economy, and not just Oklahoma, but across the country, because now people aren't going to have that money to spend on their rent. They're not going to have that money to spend in tourism and commerce and all the other things that people need money in order to invest into the economy.
So I'm going to mark you down, Bailey, as saying that Governor Stitt is wrong and that we do need additional stimulus funds in Oklahoma. Andy, what are you going to say?
So I have two thoughts. One is that I highly doubt that there are many people, if any, who would rather just take this like very marginal increase over their base rate of pay in exchange for work, especially after 5 months. Like, anyone I know who's out of work and at home is like grinding their gears, ready to get out of the house and go do anything, right? And so I hope that this will be like previous economic downturns, that the pain of the market stimulates some entrepreneurship and really encourages folks to maybe get out there. And so if someone's, maybe they're making a tiny bit more money than they were previously, and that allows them the flexibility to like finally get that startup going they've been talking about, or write that play or whatever it is that you're into, that will be better for our economy and better for our country in the long run than arguing about the money right now. Secondly, more importantly, I want to go back to Scott's original question, and really the original question from Twitter that was posed to us about how we feel about Governor Stitt saying we don't need more money. Because I need to go back and read the quote exactly, so there may be a big flaw in my logic here, but I think what the governor was saying is we need to spend the money we have already before we get more money. Now, it is not the governor's job to decide whether or not we get money from Congress. That's Congress's job. But I do think we need to have a conversation. What's the holdup? Like, if the state has already received $1 billion, where's that money going? And why isn't it flowing more quickly? Because there are people in need. And if the governor's thought is we might need more money once we spend what we have, well, we should talk about let's spend what we have. Like, I get the idea of like, because I've been in the situation where, I was getting funding for a program. They were like, would you like more money? And it's like, well, let's make sure that, we want to be good stewards of our money. And we want to make sure we're spending it correctly and efficiently, and we're getting the bang for our buck that we want. But if that's not happening, like if money's sitting in the bank, or, we're spending it on medications that are not proven to be effective, like, let's talk about that and find ways to spend the money then, rather than arguing about somebody else's job. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the focus of this conversation has been about what Congress should do, when like there's also this like subtext of the state's sitting on money that we should spend somehow.
I don't think the challenge is, though, figuring out where to spend the money and spending it in a targeted way, because there's a whole laundry list of organizations and businesses and Oklahomans themselves, residents, who have ideas and ways that those dollars can go down to support eviction relief, to reduce homelessness, to increase our public health and add supports to our frontline workers, to supporting food security efforts through food banks. And I mean, there's just a laundry list of ways that the government can spend that money. But it is also about the fundamental philosophies that the leadership brings into this space, because we have put our majority conservative legislature into a awkward spot of how do we spend $1.3 billion quickly? And if you fundamentally believe that government isn't the answer, then you aren't chomping at the bit to say, we could put money here, we could put money towards this, we could put money towards that. I mean, one example to a point you raised earlier, Andy, that it depends on, every state is different. And we have all of these different governments that operate in different ways. Like Oklahoma County is struggling to spend the funds, not because they can't identify places to spend it, but because of the district attorney's interpretation of how the funds can be used and allocated. And so instead of being able to get the money out to the, Oklahoma County and City Health Department and getting it out to this organization, this nonprofit, that state agency, whatever. I mean, not state agency, but county agency, whatever. They're sitting on this money because they're trying to figure out how they can legally spend it based on the interpretations that they've been given, right? And so I think that's one other challenge into the mix is the ideology of our leadership in spending government money quickly, because when has government ever rushed into things that are related to money? It's rare. So we're in a really unprecedented time where the federal government's saying, hey, take this money, spend it. And so we're having to retrain our brains to say, we do have this money and we can use it to help support some needed things. I mean, because the governor constantly talks about wanting to be top 10 in the state. And one of the ways that we can become a top 10 state is making these needed investments that have been neglected for so long. And we have an opportunity to get a head start on that. But the answer is definitely not, we don't need the money. The answer is more so of, let's spend this money and then assess where we could use more money, right? And so I'm just alarmed at the way that the question was answered, as if we don't have to figure out how we got to pay for Medicaid expansion in 2021, or that we don't have to figure out how to plug budget shortfalls, or figuring out how to maintain state agencies who have been, cut over time, you know what I mean? And so there's just a laundry list of needs to say that we don't need the money when we actually do.
And this year, I'm going to piggyback you, Bailey, because this is exactly what I was wanting to get at too, was that one thing I'll say is the governor did say, I think yesterday, maybe it was this morning, I think it was yesterday, that he is, I think, shuffling around some responsibilities to try and streamline these funds getting out the door quicker than they have thus far. But a lot of the way that the money, this 1.2 billion, right? Like that sounds like a big number because it is, but a lot of that is I don't want to say it's not pre-spent, but it's kind of like pre-designated, right? Like there are certain chunks that go to municipalities automatically, like they're earmarked. There's chunks that are earmarked for Oklahoma City because of our population, right? There are chunks that are earmarked that can only be spent on things like PPE. There are chunks that are earmarked that can be spent on, ventilator. There's you can use it on only, pandemic related costs, which are substantial. So I don't know that you can use this I would assume we have $1 billion worth of COVID related costs. Maybe we don't, but I don't know that you can take necessarily 500 million of this 1.2 billion and shove it at the education budget, unless you're shoving it at the education budget in a way that is specifically designed to alleviate the effects of coronavirus by using distance learning or whatever. And even if you do that, it doesn't fix the fact that we're going to have a huge shortfall next year because of how much lower tax revenues are. One, because of the price of oil, and two, because of how many people are out of work. And so the idea that we've just been given $1.2 billion, we don't need any more. My take was that is the classic. I mean, I get so frustrated, and politicians on both sides of the aisle do this. I think they do it for different reasons, but this refusal to plan for the future, because to plan for the future would require me to do something that is either difficult or against my ideology, right now, right? Saying that we don't need a universal masking mandate because, County X doesn't have any cases. Why should they have to wear masks? So they don't have any freaking cases, right? So they stay at zero. You don't wait until they're overrun with the virus to put a mask mandate in place. That's how you wind up with hospitals that are overstaffed, right? So we shouldn't be waiting until next May when we're going, okay, is it 15% across the board budget cuts for state agencies to try and save us $1 billion before we like ask for help, right? We know there is going to be a huge hole in the budget for next year. We also know that local politicians, up to and including the majority leader in the state House of Representatives, are counting, or at least have been counting, on the federal government to fill a huge part of that hole. And so they should say so. And that leadership should come from the top, right? Like from the governor's office, to say that, like, yeah, we're gonna need some help. So that's a long-winded way of just saying, Bailey, yes. That's a long-winded way of saying I agree with Bailey.
Well, and I think that's a very good point. In my 10 plus years of experience dealing with federal grants, often, and I think I've said this on the show before, but we would get, funding notifications of funds that were available for, our area, right, for HIV and AIDS, that we didn't even apply for. And some of my staff would say, why didn't you apply? And it's like, because those funds were like earmarked for these very specific things and they were time limited, and there was no way for us to do it. And it was so frustrating because, the feds might say, well, what do you need money for? And we could give a laundry list of things.
But
here's money for this other thing.
But funding was not available. Right. And, and so we would always try to come up with creative ways to do it, but it is difficult, right? Like, and in some ways I feel for the state because we're in the same situation where we need not just one-time funding, but ongoing funding, at least for a little while. And that's what we used to say with our grants is like, 1 year of money is great, but it's hard for us to hire staff and get things rolling because of how
have to fire those folks because you can't afford to pay them in year 2.
Right. Give me 3 years of money and we can talk. Like I can develop a program. I've got some ideas and we have time to hire, train, and implement this program in that amount of time. And if the federal government would just say, I don't know, every state gets X amount of dollars per person as some kind of like big chunk and they give it, that's one thing. But every state's being hit differently, right? Oklahoma's getting a double whammy, not just from the COVID stuff of things shutting down, but it has that trickle down impact on the oil and gas industry and all of that. And so we are, everyone has a slightly different flavor of COVID impact than each other. And it is a difficult situation. And as we have said a million times, like these are unprecedented times. And the reason we don't have a good plan for this is because we've never been here before.
Right.
We have good plans for how we should respond to pandemics themselves, like the spread of the disease, but each one's a little bit different and has a different impact on the economy, and it's tough. These are hard things.
So, Andy, to what you raised, the conversation is not we don't need the money, but rather congressional delegation, here's what we need the money for, and we don't need it earmarked for narrow things that won't help us get to sustainability. And so I hope that our leadership will move to having those types of conversations about sustaining the economy and not just narrow coronavirus relief, because coronavirus relief means sustaining the economy. So I think you raise an important point about granting in that process to ensure that we have the flexibility to use it for the things that will help Oklahomans in the long term.
Right. Related.
The flip.
Some breaking news here from the AP. This is within the last half an hour. A last-ditch effort to revive collapsing Capitol Hill talks on vital COVID-19 rescue money ended in disappointment on Friday, making it increasingly likely that Washington gridlock will mean more hardship for millions of people who are losing enhanced jobless benefits and further damage for an economy pummeled by the still raging coronavirus. The Dems basically wanted a $3 trillion package. The White House and the Republicans were looking at a $1 trillion package. Sounds like Speaker Pelosi said, we'll meet you in the middle. We'll go down $1 trillion, you go up $1 trillion, which I can't even believe we're saying that words. But they said that was the White House would not meet them there. The Dems offered to cut $1 trillion out of their package if the White House would go up, and the White House said no.
Yeah. Well, so in summary, no deal.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, the flip side to what Bailey was saying is that if you just give a big chunk of money to the states without putting limits on what they can spend it on or earmarking for certain things, then you do run the risk that money goes places that isn't helpful anyway, right? Like
That's a good point.
like to PR contracts for the former spokespeople and chiefs of staff for high-ranking state officials.
could be that, but $1 billion is a lot of money. I mean, but like it could go to capital improvement projects like roads and bridges, which we need, but that doesn't actually help the businesses and the people, that need the money right now. So.
Yeah. Or at the very least, there's ways that government can widen the parameters of how dollars can be spent that would be beneficial and would help expedite how states are spending their money. So they don't have to spend so much time of thinking, okay, what services fit within these parameters for us to help meet these needs, all while thinking about the everyday, day-to-day of running government and the business that needs to happen and thinking about going into the incoming legislative session.
We're starting to run long, but one other bit of news that I wanted to throw out to you guys tonight. Are y'all aware that apparently now in West Virginia there is a plague of cicadas that are being controlled by their zombies that are being controlled by a fungus that takes over their mind?
Yeah, this is not a new thing. We've had zombie cicada before, I believe.
Really? I've never heard about it. So I thought it was part of the fresh hell. It was a new fresh hell for 2020.
Maybe it was zombie bees. There was some other fungus was affecting some other insect a couple of years ago and controlling their brains.
It's like murder hornets, zombie cicadas, pandemic. 2020. What else you got? Don't show me, please. Don't show me what else you have.
I guess we'll see next week.
We've got 5 months left. Could be lots of stuff.
Jeez, that seems like a long time.
Yeah. All right. Well, on the note of zombie cicadas, let's end there. Thank you, Scott, for being here.
Hey, man, I wouldn't miss it.
All right. Bailey, thank you for being here as well.
Thank you, Andy.
My name is Andy Moore, and you've been listening to Let's Pod This. Don't forget to subscribe and rate Let's Pod This on Apple Podcasts. Help other people find the show. The show is produced by Scott, Bailey, and me. We are a member of the Mostly Harmless Media Network. You can contact us on social media at Let's Fix This OK on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or you can send us an email at podcast@letsfixthisok.org. We'd love to hear from you. Our theme music is called Rhino Funk by artist Sodown. Let's Pod This is a program of Let's Fix This, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that strives to educate and equip all Oklahomans to engage the government. We encourage you to get involved in any way you can, and remember, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a great week, everybody.